Hello, and thank you for joining the second in our series of trauma-informed approaches for returning to school. This series is made possible by a grant from the Monmouth County Department of Human Services that was awarded to the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County in collaboration with the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide and the YMCA of Greater Monmouth County. This training for educators in kindergarten through 8th grade schools will review trauma-informed social-emotional learning and suggest ways to use that perspective in in-person or virtual classrooms. We'll also review the key points of the curriculum that accompany this training. I'm Marnie Rhoda. Joining me today are Maureen Underwood and Nicole Demore-Nolan. Nicole is the project director of the Adolescent Suicide Prevention Grant for the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County. She is a Lifeline suicide prevention trainer, and she's a school counselor of a pre-K through 8th grade school in Monmouth County. Maureen has a practice specialty in grief and trauma. In the 1980s, she developed groups for children whose family members had cancer. After September 11th, she and I worked together providing psychoeducational groups to families impacted by September 11th and then populations affected by Superstorm Sandy, suicide, and other traumatic events. We've all seen time and time again the power of relatively simple but thoughtful activities in supporting children through life's changes. I'm going to turn this over to Maureen now, who's going to get us started with our plan for the training today.
Thanks, Marnie. I'd like to personally thank you all for making the time for this. And I hope that you leave it with the same feeling that we had when we created it, that there were some really interesting ideas that could be very effective both for you and for your kids. As a team, the three of us have been living in the shadows of COVID since March. And we've learned a lot listening to educators, not just in Monmouth County and New Jersey, but really all over the country. We've tried to listen very carefully so we could combine what we knew with what you know and hopefully give you some ideas as you start the new school year. The key points we want to make to describe what our plan is for today is, first of all, you hear a lot of talk about the new normal. It's been something that's been in the press. People refer to it pretty constantly since the spring. And while that means something to us as adults, I'm not so sure it means anything to kids, especially those little kids, because this is just the way their life has been. This is what normal is. It just is different and it changes. So we'd like to kind of have you consider using the word different normal, because again, it makes it sound like it's something that it's easy to cope with. We cope with different things all the time. We also have a recognition that things are pretty unpredictable. We just start getting used to something and it changes. And sometimes that unpredictability can destabilize us. So that's one of the threads that runs through some of the curriculum we're going to share with you, because we want to talk about what those implications are and try to prepare your students for if and when they happen in the course of the school year. But I think probably the most important thing is what we want to highlight today is that we want you to remember is that we all have skills to help us cope with change. If there is one constant in life, it's change. And what that requires us to be is flexible enough to roll with the punches. As I was putting this together, I tried to think of a nicer metaphor than punches, but I do think that there are times in life when it feels like life has given us a punch in the gut. And we all have learned how to take a few deep breaths and get back up on our feet again. So what we're going to cover today is kind of help us do that. And we've grounded what we're sharing in evidence-based information that has a trauma-informed social emotional learning perspective. And what we're really going to try to do is take what you already know and review how you can use it in your current environment in a creative way. We're going to give you, as we mentioned, a 10-point curriculum as a guide. And even though we're giving it to you as a guide, our goal is to encourage you to use your own creativity in either applying these activities or to come up with some of your own. What we're not going to cover, we want to be very clear straight up, is we're not going to go into any of the things that are going into district decisions because they could be different from district to district and school to school. So we're not going to talk anything at all about scheduling, shifting between virtual and in person, social distancing questions, masks, cleanings, lunch procedures, any of that stuff. So that's what we're not going to do. But our concept is that we believe that even though there are some people who have been traumatized by this experience of COVID-19, more than that, almost everyone has really been affected by a condition of what we call chronic stress or distress. Now, these may seem like they're just semantic differences to you, and perhaps they really are, but we'd like you to think about these as we go through the rest of our content, because when you look at trauma, this is the definition of it. It's a frightening event, and certainly lots of things that have happened during COVID have been frightening, and it's defined by something that has overwhelming intensity. We feel helpless to respond adequately, and there are usually long-term effects for us on our mental organization, and that may be that creating of that distress. Now, obviously, we have no clue what those long-term effects are going to be, either on ourselves or on our students. So rather than jump into trauma right now, even though we're going to use it as an underpinning, we really thought we could talk more about this in the context of stress. And what you all know, there's two different kinds of stress. So we're going to start with that. We're not going to really go into the biology of stress because we know you've heard that probably 100 times already. But we're going to talk about stress, and we're going to contrast acute stress and chronic stress. Acute stress, obviously, acute means quick, short term. You feel it, for example, when you're in your car and the person in front of you stops suddenly and you slam on your brakes. I mean, that's really feeling some acute stress. When you have a fight with someone, feel it in your gut, or even when you're skiing down one of those double black diamond slopes, and it's so exciting. It really helps you get through difficult situations. There's a lot of adrenaline that comes, and all of us have had that experience of acute stress at one time or another. Chronic stress, on the other hand, is stress that lasts much longer. Any type of stress that goes on for weeks or months is what we would call chronic stress. And the trouble with it is we can become so used to chronic stress that we don't realize it as a problem. And if you don't find ways to manage it, it actually can lead to health problems. I'm sure that you know a lot of people, and it may sometimes be some of you, who live in conditions of chronic stress. A lot of people have moved into that since COVID started. There is that grave concern that that has been one of the consequences of COVID, and that more and more people are going to experience that chronic stress as COVID goes on. The second concept of stress that we want to point out to you is the difference between distress, which is the second point on that slide, which causes us anxiety or concern, compared to eustress. Those are the events that happen in your life where you get positive feelings of excitement. So those are two other differentiations when it comes to talking about stress. How you respond both to stress and to trauma, and I want to be kind of clear about this, because even though we're making that semantic difference, in some ways there's a lot of similarities. But regardless of the nature of stress or how old the person is who is implicated or affected, the key to dealing with it is safety, is providing a climate of safety. And if we use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those of you who have watched us in our other webinars know we just use this all the time. This is my favorite person in the world, is Abraham Maslow. So we're going to Maslow, and what he tells us is that you've got to have those physiological needs met first. That's, for example, food, shelter, medicine. And I'm sure, not too far from the front of your mind, maybe a thought about how the economic devastation of COVID has really implicated a lot of people feeling like they can't even meet those physiological needs. And that's a really, really tough place to be. There's not much you can do about that, except perhaps the food that you provide for kids, when they come to school, or that you give them as backpacks to take home for the weekend. So food may be one of the physiological needs you can help meet. But the three on top of that, safety, social, and esteem, are things that you can do in the school climate. And certainly we're going to be talking about what are some of the ways that you can increase feelings of safety, not just for your students, for yourself, because you're part of this as well. How do you increase those social connections? We know that that's one of the critical areas that online learning is really wreaking havoc with, is that social connection and social cohesiveness that's clearly important for kids as a developmental milestone. And then we also know that schools are really, one of your jobs is to try to help kids develop good, solid self-esteem. So when you look at the curriculum activities we're going to talk about, those are the places we're going to go with them. And I want you to kind of refer back to those, because you're going to hear them as themes and threads that run through what we're giving you, and what we'd like you to think about as you create additional activities for your students. So one way that we thought of suggesting for you to make this content your own is in your workbook or your curriculum guide. What you're going to see is there are several questions in there, and they're the questions that are referenced in this PowerPoint. So the first question we want you to take a look at are 5 things that you can do as an educator to really facilitate or increase that feeling of safety for both your students and yourself. And we'd really like you to write these down, because these are going to be the foundation for everything you do all year, whether your class is virtual or it's in person. You've got to figure out how to encourage safety on both of those sides. What we also want to recognize is that there are some reasons that the school climate is going to be different or changing. As we said before, almost all of your students are going to be experiencing some kind of chronic stress, and all of your colleagues are as well, some more than others. There's some of your colleagues who may have been traumatized by events that have happened over the last several months, especially if they had someone they knew who got sick or died. So you really do want to pay extra attention to provide support to those folks, because those are going to be really, really tough losses to grieve. Those of you who listened to some of our web series in the spring know we did a whole section on grief and loss. We know that there's a lot of your kids who are going to be struggling with holding on to developmental milestones, even achieving them. And there's going to be that bunch of kids who may have regressed some when school was out. And I wish I could say, oh, it's just your younger kids, but I think you may be seeing some of that in your middle school students as well, some of that regression. We know that we can expect the unexpected. That's the playbook. That's what it's going to be. So you want to be prepared for it. Don't make any assumptions that one day or 1 week is going to be like the next. And the last point we wanted to make, because we certainly have seen a lot of this in the press lately, where there are those who are feeling like, school has to go back in person, consequences be damned. And a lot of those of you who are in school settings are saying, wait a minute, we have to pay attention to safety. No matter what you do, not everyone is going to appreciate it. You know this already. If you've been teaching, you've run up against this 100 times. And you just can't please everybody all the time. There's just no way you can do it. And if you do it some of the time, you're probably ahead of the curve. So when you start to feel pressure from all different places, maybe especially parents, just know it's no different than it ever was. It may be a little louder this time, but you know how to manage that. And the one thing that you do know that is really, really critical, and we all know this for sure, your relationship with your students is more important than ever. And let me explain why that is. Now, we've talked about the concept of stress, right? So I want to give you, this is the only biology, and it's not even biology 101, it's probably biology 0. But here is a little bit about what happens when we're in chronic stress. When kids are under stress, it's not just their bodies, their tension in their bodies, but what happens in their brains is that their brains release the neurochemical cortisol. And when cortisol is released in the brain, it impairs the limbic system of the brain, which is where memory is. So you can see how it affects learning. At the very same time, however, if kids have supportive relationships with trusted adults like you, their brain releases oxytocin. And what the oxytocin does is it opposes some of those negative effects of the cortisol, and it helps normalize and reorganize the brain architecture. So that's really a specific reason that relationships are such a significant protective factor for children. And that's going to bring us to your second assignment, which is taking a look at some of the things that you might do to have better relationships with your students. And you may remember Nicole, when she talked about support, control, and structure in our last educator training. She's going to bring in the perspective of someone who's in the classroom every day to kind of walk us through this with a little bit more personal perspective. Nicole, I'm going to turn this over to you.
All right, thanks, Maureen. Okay, guys, so trauma-informed care. You know, it's this concept that we've heard a lot about, especially as now it's being encouraged that New Jersey classrooms incorporate it into their school buildings. But I get this question all the time. What is it though? What I hear teachers say often is that trauma-informed care addresses every student that they have as if they were impacted by a trauma. But I want to move away from that. What I really want us to focus on is that it's really actually just doing some very small things in our classrooms that help us be more sensitive to the needs of our students, which will in turn help us decrease some behavioral challenges and build them up to be more resilient against later challenges in life. Marnie is going to take us through our next few slides.
Great. So Maureen and Nicole have both brought us to where we are now. And where we are now, and I think we all recognize that to some extent, is we are living history. As every day that goes by, we are creating and living history in a very real way. We've all had new experiences over the last several months, and they'll be memorable for us. We will tell the stories of this in the future, but we're still in the middle of it right now. We are, and our students are. We're in the middle of the experience. And that gives us the opportunity to help our students shape that history that they're creating in a positive way. So let's take a look at some ways to do that. Now, these 5 categories give us a strong framework to do that. We're going to look at each one of them individually. While we go through them, Nicole will jump in and add her perspective to this conversation as someone who's in the classroom. Sound good, Nicole?
Yes, yep.
Great, thanks. Okay, so first, predictable routines. Here is that very important, essential first concept. Now, you already do this every day. You do this by posting daily class schedules. Maybe you give your students a look at a week at a glance. And you inform students of changes that might be coming up in their day or their weeks as soon as they happen. COVID-19 has provided us with another opportunity, though, to really enforce those predictable routines and make the unpredictable more predictable by creating that stoplight plan ahead of time to deal with some of those unanticipated changes in our learning format. Nicole, maybe you can give some examples you've thought of about that.
Sure. So the stoplight plan is a great way that we can help our students process ahead of time what they would do or what it would look like if there was a possible disruption to in-person learning, or they needed to return to a hybrid format, or even remote only teaching. The way that I would do this, right, first I would just have a discussion with students. I would ask them, what or how would you feel if we needed to return to a remote only learning environment? What might be challenging for you if we had to go back there again? And this is all great data for you as the teacher to have, so that you can kind of make your lesson plans and make them meaningful and know ahead of time what those challenges may be for your students and address them, you know, in a way beforehand instead of waiting for them to actually happen in real time. And then lastly, you know, what I always like to ask is, what can I do as a teacher to help you? This will give you some good insight, and it may be something as simple as, we need to be able to just talk in the morning before we really get going in a virtual learning environment. This will help you create that plan, and then you can go back and you can readdress it later on. So if something does happen or change, you can say to your students, all right, guys, we've planned for this. We're ready for this. We've created our stoplight. Remember those emotions. Remember those challenges we've identified. Remember what you said that I can do to help you, and remind them that you guys will get through this together.
Nicole, thank you so much, because I do think that all those examples you just gave are a way to make the unpredictable more predictable this year. Thanks. So thinking back now to Maureen's favorite person, Maslow, you'll remember that safety was number 2 on Maslow's hierarchy. Social connecting. Safety was 1, social connecting was number 2 on Maslow's hierarchy. And you'll remember that those social connections, especially from a trusted adult, are protective factors from stress. So we know how important this category is, and we know how important it is to do these things. So doing things that you probably do every day without even thinking of it, like welcoming your students every day, are reinforcing that positive relationship you have with them, and it is giving them a trauma-informed approach. Now, especially for your younger students, if you're learning in person, wearing your photo, you know, as big as an 8x10 laminated photo of you on your chest, wearing your photo will help them to recognize you and form that essential connection with you. Also, if you're in person, another suggestion is to, you know, just put aside a handful of COVID-19 school outfits. That way you don't have to worry with processes of disinfecting all your clothes or any special. You have special clothes you wear. You don't need a lot of them. What's great about that for kids is that early in the year, you'll be much more recognizable to them despite your mask. You know, finally, when it comes to building strong and supportive relationships, that relationship with you is essential, but we also know your students need to form relationships with each other. So small group activities are important now more than ever, and we include them in the curriculum that we're providing you. However, we know that it might feel impossible right now with all the restrictions that you have in place to make some of that happen. What we're asking you to do is take our ideas as seeds, and whether or not you can use them right now, or you feel that your environment is too restricted to use them, hold on to them. I expect you'll find creative ways to use them that work in your environment, even if you can't see it now. All right, empowering students' agency. Well, what's agency? You might have not heard agency used this way before. In this definition of agency, what we're talking about is the capacity of an individual to act independently and make their own free choices. So with that in mind, you know that this is a critical step for children as they're moving up and developing that self-esteem. That's that next rung in Maslow's hierarchy. So just like us, students might feel right now that life is happening to them, and they might have lost that critical sense of agency. So your job here is to help them connect with their agency And how do you do that? So engage them in problem solving, all the challenges at hand, either the challenges that you're facing in the classroom or in school, or engage them in the bigger picture of problems, have them contribute to some ideas to problem solving what's happening in the world right now. Also, when they're talking about classroom suggestions or suggestions they have for their classroom or their day or their learning experience, the ones that are feasible, go ahead and implement them, reinforce their agency in the world. And finally, recognizing the bravery and courage of their generation and coping with this different COVID-19 world is really important. Later on in the curriculum, Nicole's going to talk about some of an activity we have to reinforce that. So that's a great way to do it. But even just day to day, recognizing that they're showing up is important. Now, once again, and we've referred to this now a couple times, but once again, I want to refer you back to the training that Nicole and Susan did on support, control, and structure. In that training, she walked you through a great deep breathing exercise and a great visualization. So that's, when we talk about developing self-regulation skills, that's one way to do it, and it's a really great way, and that's already recorded for you to refer back to if you want to. Many of you, of course, have been using this for years already in your classrooms. Now more than ever, it's more of a priority, so we're reminding you about it. You also don't have to take a several-minute break and do an activity like that. Sometimes during the day, just a moment of silence is enough, both for you and your students. It's all you need. And finally, providing opportunities to explore individual and cultural identities is very important, and COVID-19 is providing us with some great opportunities to do that. So it's an important thing that our students need, and I think we're set up uniquely to do it right now. So having students understand who they are, where they come from, it's a continuous process, and you can make it a year-long theme. It's easily done remotely, and the current climate is giving you more opportunities to look at this, because after all, as we've already said, you and your students are all living history. Which brings me to that last bit of the 3 assignments we've put in your curriculum guide for you. This one is about how you can use the pandemic to expand the cultural horizon of your students. This is very purposefully put in here because we know lots of ways the pandemic is holding us back, and looking for ways the pandemic is a tool that we can use to do something that we want to do anyway is a really great way to reframe it. So when you have a moment, you want to look at all 3 of those activities before you start the school year, because we know that once you start the school year, you might get swept away in all that entails. Which gives me now an opportunity to welcome Nicole back to your training. I'm going to hand it to you, and she's going to take you right into this curriculum.
All right, guys. So the moment you've all been waiting for, our actual curriculum. Today, we're going to go through a couple of the activities. These aren't all of them, but I just want to point out a couple of things before we start. You guys have a curriculum guide, and it would be beneficial if you guys are able to follow along right now. You don't need to, but it will give you a better understanding of some of the activities that we're going to go over. All of the activities are laid out in detail. It gives you a couple of talking points. It tells you what materials are needed. So everything is right there for you. And if we do have handouts that we reference, they are also in that guide for you guys to use and photocopy. Remember, you may have to alter some of these activities based on your school's current policies or protocols as it relates to COVID. A lot of social emotional learning curriculum calls for group work, and we've put that in there with the hopes that you guys would be able to do that. But if you aren't able to do that, take these seeds and plant them in the most meaningful way into your classrooms. All right, so we've matched these activities to relevant national healthcare curriculum standards, and those are outlined in your guide for you. So I want you guys to go ahead and look at those, because what we did was we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. They're all developmentally appropriate, and what you'll see is some activities are even across the age spectrum. We've been able to do them with great success from kids as young as kindergarten all the way up through 8th grade, but some of them are broken down into K-2, 3-5, and 6-8. This again focuses on that trauma-informed care that really addresses chronic stress or trauma in your students. And all of these work both virtually and in person. Okay. So the first activity that we have is our COVID map. And as you can see from your guide, what you're going to actually have your students do is create something that looks like a treasure map. It's across the age spectrum. It allows you to see the experiences that your students identify for themselves from the past 6 months. But what's important to notice is it doesn't dwell on the past. It quickly moves them into the future. So it will end with something where you guys are focusing on what they're looking forward to this school year. So it ends on that positive note. It's that opportunity to frame the uncertain as new. It's going to move your students past that trauma. So you're going to encourage students to draw a picture. Maybe your older kids, they'll draw something like an emoji, but they'll start with a picture of themselves, and then they'll move through that map with a couple of different scenarios. What it felt like for them, or what it looked like when they first found out that we weren't going back to school, what virtual learning looked like at home. Maybe it was a happy time for them, maybe it wasn't so much, maybe there was a lot of conflict. When they found out we weren't going back to school for the school year, moving into the summer, and then ultimately landing on that treasure with what they're looking forward to this year in your classroom with their fellow students, and reminding them that it may be in person and that it may actually be virtual. So we're going to move on to our next activity, and this is identifying feelings. And you guys know that a key component of social emotional learning is the ability of our students to identify feelings. What we're going to do first is for our kindergarten through second graders, we'll have them identify feelings as they relate to colors. So what does this look like in the classroom? You're going to ask them questions like, when you see the color red, what feeling do you think of? And usually answers are mad or angry. Green is usually envy or disgust, and blue might be sad. There's a handout in your workbook or your curriculum guide that you will print out for use during this activity. And students will actually be able to color in their own bodies as it relates to their feelings. So they may draw a heart, and in their heart they may feel happy, so maybe that's a yellow color for them. Or maybe in their head they feel sad about something, so their face might be blue. But they'll go ahead and they'll decorate themselves as it relates to the colors and their feelings that they've identified. For our older students, what they're going to do is one of my favorite activities to do in classrooms, and they're going to create masks. And these feeling masks identify outside feelings and inside feelings. And what's great about this is I believe that there's a lot of conflict within our students right now, especially in returning to school. And what that may look like is on the outside, they may pretend to be happy to be back in school and with their friends, but on the inside, they may be really anxious or worried about contracting COVID or something else about school. Maybe the flip, they may be really, really happy on the inside about going back to school, but all of their friends or their family members are really worried. So this gives them a really great opportunity to identify those conflicting feelings and to kind of look at themselves and say, this is something I have to work on. You know, this speaks to a lot of the things that are going on in our world right now with conflicting information and everything that's going on as it relates to COVID. Moving on to our next activity, is using your mind to help your body. It's another key component of all social emotional learning is this mindful activity that you can do, and it's quick and it's sweet. It goes along with that collective breath that Susan and I have talked about in previous trainings, where it not only helps your students when things feel a little out of control, but it's also going to help you as well come up for air when your classroom is kind of overwhelming. We can use our bodies also to help our minds. And I want you guys to think about that in kind of the reverse. So while we may have a couple of activities in here where you use your mind to help your body, and in a minute, I'm going to actually walk you through what our curriculum activity looks like, we can use our bodies to help our minds. And a way that I do this, at least with the younger students in a K through 2 setting, is we practice our faces, and we practice our silly face or our happy face, even our angry face. And this usually releases a lot of tension for kids because it gets them moving that body. It's kind of like, you know, muscle relaxation and kind of those type of techniques that we use with kids. And it usually always ends in giggles and laughs as we see our friends making some silly faces. And that may be something that's complicated this year and not really something that you can do because of masks. But again, taking these seeds and planting them and figuring out a way to make that work in your classroom. That may be an activity that you use when you're virtual or not in the classroom setting where students have to wear masks. So what I want you guys to do first is I want you to sit back in a comfortable position. I want you to go ahead and close your eyes. I'm going to walk you through our lemon activity. Picture in your hands a juicy piece of freshly cut lemon. I want you to imagine bringing that lemon up to your face, what that feels like. I want you to smell how citrusy it is and take a big, deep breath of its lemony smell. Now I want you to bring the lemon up to your mouth. Open your mouth and take a nice big bite out of that lemon. I want you guys to open your eyes and tell me what happened when I told you to take a bite out of that lemon.
Oh, my face just went squish. I could just feel how sour it was. It was like, yeah, real puckery. Ah.
You know, my mouth watered right away. I like lemons, to be honest. But that being said, the initial reaction was kind of a tightening of my body, and my mouth was watering in anticipation of what was about to happen.
Mm-hmm. And Marnie, what you bring up is a great point between the mind-body connection and how we have these reactions to things, even when we're using our imaginations, and how powerful and how strong that is for our students. And this is another activity, especially the lemon one, that usually ends in a lot of giggles, because either we, like what just happened here is you have somebody who absolutely hates the taste of lemon and is like squirming in their seat, like, oh, don't make me do it. And then somebody who's like, oh, that was so refreshing. Like, I wish I could have a glass of like sweet lemonade right now. And it didn't take long, right, guys? Like, it was only a couple of seconds. And how did you feel afterwards?
You know, for me, what happened was just that one moment where you said to close my eyes was such a nice break from my day. You know, I forget that I need to take a break from my day. So that, first of all, was just a nice break from my day for a moment. And then it was nice to have, for me, it was, you know, taking a sensory break, and I feel refreshed and kind of more ready to finish this training.
Yeah, it did the same. I mean, it did the same thing for me. It took me out of the training into my mouth. and it was just, and you did it. It was so simple. So I didn't have to really concentrate on it. It was just, you know, feel this, taste this. And, you know, I could imagine tasting other lemon kinds of things just from that, you know, kind of imaginary experience. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And so what I want you guys to realize too is this doesn't take a lot of classroom prep, right? Like, you guys all know how it feels to bring a lemon up to your face and how to walk through somebody and tasting something. So even if you needed to do something off the cusp, if, you know, you've done the lemon already and you've done the ice cream, maybe you want to do something like baking cookies. You know how to walk your students through that, and it's something you can do on demand. So maybe you've had this planned, you know, weeks in advance, but today is a different day and you need something for your students to come up for that collective breath. You can kind of throw this type of mindful activity in where you need it. Okay, so our next activity is understanding what we lost. And this activity helps us address the grief our students experienced the past 6 months while they were in shutdown and unable to go to school. And it also addresses the experiences that they've had over the summer as well. This is important to remember for a couple of reasons. Like, I think we've been so hyper-focused on what students have missed as part of not being in school that sometimes we forget that chronic stress that also came up for experiences that aren't related to school. So those also go a little bit deeper, and they could be something like, you know, related to school where it's a missed sports season or an academic milestone, certainly, but maybe they missed a family trip that they've had planned, or maybe they've missed something where they haven't seen a family member who lives across the country and now they're not going to see them for another year. Informal family traditions are things that I'm also concerned about. You know, you have kids who look forward to going to Walmart every year and picking out, you know, something for back to school and all of that. And now they have to do that online, which kind of takes out the joy a little bit of, you know, that returning back to school. You know, it could be other family traditions. Like, I know in our family, me and my son like to go and try every flavor of ice cream at different ice cream shops throughout, you know, the Jersey Shore. And that really hasn't been something we've been able to do all summer. And I was surprised how impactful that was on my son. And so it's those little family traditions that you're going to see come up for kids that is something that they've lost and isn't really directly related to school. I would actually be surprised to see how many related to school goes into this activity versus, you know, these informal traditions that they have about their lives that they've missed out on the past couple of months. So what you guys are going to do here is you have your treasure chest in front of you, and kids are going to fill their treasure chest with the things that they've lost. But the flip side, which is the trauma-informed care, is also bringing them up for air to realize the things that they've gained. So we're putting our losses and our gains into this treasure chest. And so those gains are some things that maybe they didn't expect to experience while in shutdown. There's a lot of students who've confronted me about the fact that they got to sleep later in the day. That was a big win for them. I've had a lot of kids who said that shutdown wasn't all bad. They got to spend a lot of extra time with that pet that they feel they've neglected during the school year. And then finally, you know, I have a lot of students who actually did so much better academically because that social anxiety was decreased. They no longer had to worry about doing embarrassing things in front of their peers or failing a test or the pressure of being in a classroom or some of those things that really go along with social anxiety, that once that kind of dissipated, they were able to focus on their academics and their grades actually went up. Moving on to our next activity. This is another one that mirrors something that Susan and I did in our previous training, and that's letting go of worry over what we can't control. This lesson is going to be something that benefits our students in a variety of future scenarios and throughout the remainder of their life. Right? So in our older student curriculum, those 3rd grade through 8th graders, they're going to have the exact handout that you did in our previous training, where you have the bubble of things I can control and things I can't control. And what that handout will help students do is identify and name those things specifically and help them learn to focus on letting go of them. For our kindergarten through 2nd graders, they will watch a 2-minute video and discuss the importance of our imaginations in helping us as a coping skill to let go of the things that we can't control while focusing on the things that we can. We're gonna move on to our next activity 2. This is a really, really important one, so I'm going to try and spend a little bit of time here and kind of really go through it. And as we know with COVID, a sense of fear has spread across not only our schools and our families, but really the country and the entire world. What I want to kind of turn it back to, though, is coming to school in and of itself for a lot of our students, not all of them, but for a lot of them, was a major stressor for kids to begin with. You know, I named a few a little bit before, but things like getting bad grades, even getting called on class. I have kids who are nervous to raise their hand to go to the bathroom because people are going to look at them when they ask the question. You know your students and you know your anxious ones who were really fearful about going to school in the first place. So now we've complicated that with something like COVID and wearing masks or having to do things certain ways. And I'm sure we have kids who are worried about breaking guidelines or stepping out of bounds in certain ways. But what this activity does and what it's important to remember is that students face and overcome fear on a daily basis. And even us in our own personal lives do things that we never really congratulate ourselves for. So in my previous work with kids with grief and trauma, you know, I've taken a pause and I've said to them, I am so proud of you for being so courageous to get up this morning, get dressed, and come to school. And I've had students who've looked at me like I'm crazy, like, Mrs. Nolan, I had to get up and come to school today. I didn't really have any other option. And I remind them, but you did. You could have stayed in bed. You could have made up an excuse to your mom or your dad that you didn't feel well. You could have done a variety of things to avoid coming to school. But here you are, second period, in my office during free study to figure out what it is. And I'm congratulating you for being here because I'm sure you haven't even done that for yourselves. And I can watch them have this epiphany that kind of rolls over them of, wow, I've had this traumatic thing happen to me. I've been under so much stress that I'm not even recognizing that I'm doing these big things on a daily basis. So this is what that activity does. And it reinforces that we are courageous. And even in those small times, we need to congratulate ourselves for the things that we're overcoming. So in our kindergarten to 2nd grade curriculum, what we're going to do there is read The Little Engine That Could. And we're going to talk with the kids about the things that maybe the engine was afraid of, maybe he was afraid of failure, couldn't do something, and how he used his bravery to get where he needed to go. And as you can tell, that's a developmentally appropriate activity. You know, kids know that story well, so you can kind of take them into a different aspect with it and even go further. One of the other things we're going to do for the 3rd grade through the 8th grade is we're going to ask them a couple of questions about bravery. And I like this because I always like when we can kind of do a social emotional learning writing prompt or any type of reflective work that really is personal to the student but requires some, you know, writing and insight. So you're going to ask them one brave thing that they've done recently, and they'll write and talk about that. And then one brave thing I still have to do. And that's important because bravery is something we work on our entire lives. And social emotional learning is giving kids the skills to be resilient in the wake of anything that comes down. So right now it's COVID, but you even heard before with Maureen's experience, it was kids who had parents who died from cancer. It was 9/11. It was Hurricane Sandy. There are going to always be hurdles in their lives, and we're giving them the tools to be able to bounce back in a healthy way. We're going to move on to our next slide, which is going to talk about learning to deal with unpredictability. And now as a teacher, you may be looking at me a little crazy and saying, how are we going to teach dealing with unpredictability? What does that activity even look like? Certainly is one of the more complicated aspects of life, but it doesn't mean that we should shy away from it or not try to teach it. But we need to teach them how to handle how unpredictable life can be. What we know about our students, though, is even if they're as young as kindergarten, they've already developed some tools in their toolkit that helps them deal with uncertainty in their lives. And the issue with that is some of them may be healthy and some of them may be maladaptive. And what we want to do as social emotional educators is replace those maladaptive coping skills with healthy ones. Assisting students in developing this emotional regulation skill is something that will decrease those behavioral challenges again in school settings, and problem solving ahead of time can help them build resiliency. So in this activity, what we have them do is basically a little bit of a Mad Lib, and they come up with this crazy story. And kids love to do this, kindergarten through 8th grade. Again, it's across the age spectrum. And you don't really know what kind of turns the story is going to take, what silly thing is going to happen next, or where you're going to end up. But what's really important is that the story does end, and that there was a plot and things that happened and it got somebody somewhere, right? So even though the story may have been unpredictable and we may have felt anxious or even silly during those, you know, moments when we were figuring out the story, we're again identifying feelings for students so that they know what those feelings feel like when they are facing unpredictability. But we're teaching them that unpredictability is okay. It's something certainly that we can't control and that we can let go of and still be confident and resilient. Our next activity is absolutely one of my favorites. I've done this in school before, and it's a kindness challenge. And so, as you know, one of the best ways that we can help kids, you know, move towards resiliency and emotional regulation skills is to practice gratefulness and all different types of things as it relates to social emotional learning. But kindness was kind of something that we've lost, especially with a lack of, you know, in-person settings, you know, this past 6 months. And we need to come back into schools and help students, you know, readdress and relearn some of those kind activities. And one of the challenges that you guys are going to face is that our kids can't touch each other. So some kind activities might have been something along the lines of giving somebody a hug when they look down, or sharing lunch or a snack, or playing thumb war when somebody was alone on the playground by themselves. These are all types of things that these kids now can no longer do. So what does kindness look like in the wake of COVID? That's a conversation that, you know, we need to have with students. And so you're going to have an awesome kindness challenge. And what we set up was, you know, again, this is something that we would do in groups. If you can't do it in groups, we've kind of written the activity to be a little bit more individual or spaced out, socially distanced. But you're going to come up with ideas about, you know, how we can be kind to others, and have a competition between, you know, these pods in your classroom of how many kind acts each group can come up with, and whoever comes up with the most wins. And now what I like to do, and what I did in a school-wide challenge, was I had kids do this in those groups, but then we tallied those ideas, and then we went up against other classrooms. So the whole first grade went up. We have 3 first grade classrooms. So first grade classrooms went up against one another. And there was a first grade classroom that came up with, you know, 47, you know, acts of kindness, and they were the winners. And then we rewarded. But as you know, Kids love a competition and they love a challenge. So this is getting them to rise to the occasion, but also using social emotional aspects to address being kind. Next, we're going to go to another very complicated aspect of life to teach, and that's figuring out what to do when life is unfair. And now I love this for a couple of reasons, but what I am going to do is this is another activity I'm actually going to walk you through so that you can hear the story and that we can use some of the questions for a little bit of a discussion. But it helps students appreciate all the times in their life when things were unfair, but they moved on with a continued life lesson. And what we know about adolescents developmentally, right, is they take one situation and then they think that's it. It never happens again. It will never apply to something in the future. And what we're doing is we're taking them back to this concept where, no, actually, there's a lesson learned here. And though this future situation might be a little different, some of the things that you learned when life was unfair back then actually applies. And that increases and fosters resiliency. So COVID is certainly unfair. It's unfair to you as the teacher, it's unfair to their parents, unfair to their grandparents. Everybody across the world, I think, would probably not argue with me when I say that COVID has been a little unfair. So it's a great conversation starter, and it helps you model for these kids that, yeah, I've also felt that this was unfair too. You guys aren't alone in this. So I'm gonna walk you through our activity right now with our kindergarten through second graders. And it's a little bit of a story, and I'm going to read it to you. And then again, there are questions at the end. So I'm going to tell you a story about a little boy and his special birthday party. I want you to listen carefully because I'm going to ask you some questions at the end. Jack was so excited. His birthday party was tomorrow, and for the first time, he had helped his mother plan all of the details. They were going to have a scavenger hunt in the backyard, a piñata filled with candy for his friends to break, and a chocolate marshmallow birthday cake decorated with superheroes. You can tell that Jack put a lot of thought into this party. There would even be 3 kinds of ice cream so his friends could choose what flavor they wanted. It was going to be the best party he's ever had. But Jack woke up the next morning ready for his party and looked out his window. His heart sank to his feet. It was pouring raining, not just a little rain. It was like cats and dogs outside. His mother came into his bedroom and said, "Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry about the weather. We'll just have to move everything inside." Jack frowned. "Okay, I guess," he said. He was a little mad at his mom, but his mom didn't seem a little bit more upset about him having to move his party inside. "I guess we'll have to cancel that scavenger hunt," she added. "We don't want kids tramping all through the house, do we?" she smiled. "What?" said Jack. He couldn't keep himself from yelling. What will we even do instead at a party with no scavenger hunt? He was almost crying at this point. "I guess you guys can watch a video or something," his mom replied. "No worries, it will still be fun. We'll get through it." Jack wasn't happy at all, but it was still his birthday, and he didn't want to ruin it any more than the weather already had. So he started to think about how his friends would still have the piñata and the gooey chocolate cake and choice of ice cream flavors. Still good, he thought to himself. So how did the party end up going? Well, there wasn't any place to hang the piñata inside, so they just had to put it on the garage floor and the kids broke it there. There was really no candy scramble, but okay, we still had candy, right? And then the chocolate marshmallow cake, well, somehow the bakery mixed up the order and it was plain vanilla decorated with flowers, not superheroes. The ice cream too was a disaster. The flavors they got were cherry, butter pecan, and pistachio. Yuck. Now I want you guys to think about a couple questions here. How do you think Jack felt about his party overall? What did you think about his mother's reaction? What do you guys think Jack should do next? And finally, do you think Jack should even plan to have a party next year after the way this one went? As you guys can see.
As I'm listening to that, Nicole, and I especially think about the part about his mother's reaction, you know, it reminds me that sometimes we as adults look at it through our eyes and we don't put ourselves in kids' shoes to see this was probably such a big deal for him. And for his mom, well, it was just one party and there was going to be another one next year, probably, or the year after. And maybe she had parties for other kids. And so it wasn't such a big deal to her. And she couldn't really understand how he felt. So there was nobody who really kind of gave him any support for boy, how upset I would be if that was my party. And I'd have nobody to go talk to.
Right. And I think what you're pointing out is something that's so impactful about trauma-informed care is that we assume that sometimes things that are traumatic aren't, right? And something as simple as this party, while it certainly didn't rise to the level of trauma, didn't mean that we needed to be insensitive about this kid's feelings. And it was just a little bit, you know, of what we could have done, some of the language that we could have used in talking with this kid and acknowledging, you know, how he felt about this birthday party that probably could have changed how he felt, maybe a little less angry towards his mom.
Yeah.
So in the older kids, the 3rd through 8th grade, what we actually have are some scenarios of unfair situations. And again, it's a group activity where your guys will break them up and they will go ahead and move through and process them. And again, it's focusing on the lesson learned in each of these unfair situations. Next, I'm going to do our final activity that we're going to talk about today. And that's teamwork. And I really, first of all, I just think this slide is so cute with this little like smiley face, like flag, and it speaks to what it is that we're going to do in this activity. You know, it reminds us that we're all in this together. And, you know, previously we've used this "You are not alone" slogan for mental health for quite some time. And now it's become the new national anthem as we move through the COVID-19 crisis. We are all experiencing this together. And though our experiences may be a little bit different from each other, we're all going through kind of the same thing. So what I like about this activity is there's been a severe lack of teamwork, you know, since we went into a shutdown, just because some of the opportunities were lost for our students. And I think moving back into a classroom, a lot of them have questions about how we're going to revive that teamwork now that we can't really physically touch one another, or we can't physically be together, or, you know, we can't play games like we used to on the playground. You know, those are going to be things that are different. So how can we collectively bring our classroom together to appreciate teamwork and really move towards obtaining some goals together? And what we're going to do in this activity is you're going to come up with a team name for your classroom. You're going to come up with a mascot. You're going to come up with a flag, and you're going to come up with a motto. And what's really great about this is the kids get so into it and they really design something together that identifies their class. And again, this is something that can go across the school, right? So you have K through 8 and they do it, and everybody has these mottos and these slogans and this flag that they can decorate the outside of their classroom with. And, you know, even while we're socially distanced in hallways and we're moving through, kids can look and see like, oh, wow, that's 1st grade's, you know, flag and motto and things. And we can connect the whole school together. But more importantly, those kids within your classroom have this motto that they can focus on through the entire school year. And like I said, you can have them make artwork based on this. It can be something that you hang in your classroom. It can be reinforced throughout the school year. You know, it can certainly even be a celebration at the end of the school year. Like, this is what team blah, blah, blah has done, and this is what we've accomplished. And it can speak to those resiliency factors in your students. So I really enjoy doing this. And like I said, the kids really get engaged with this activity. I'm going to hand it back over to Maureen. She's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the implementation guidelines with our social emotional learning curriculum.
Thanks, Nicole. This is really just kind of reinforcing where we started. And, you know, one of the things you can see, we present this in a 1 to 10 order, which is there's some sequential capacity to it, but you don't have to follow it like that. You can pull these activities out. There's several of them. We make suggestions in the directions that you could use them more than once in the course of the year and see how kids' responses have changed through the school year. And I think especially when you're doing the map and you're doing the treasure chest of what you've lost and what you gained, those work really well to do them more than one time. You can adjust the grade level depending on the maturity of your students. Some of your 2nd graders might just be cool with that 3rd grade activity. Some of your 3rd graders might really need to do the 2nd grade activity. So you know your kids, you can fiddle around with that. And the directions are there for all of those age groups. So you can, you know, tweak them so they feel right for your class. Probably one of the most important things is that every single one of these activities, there are no right or wrong answers. This is what makes it different from the work they're doing in the classroom. They don't get a grade for this. And you want to be very clear with them before they do activities that this is so very different. They're doing these activities for themselves, not for you, not for grades, not for anything, but so that they feel better and they feel more part of a class. And that is going to be important for you, because sometimes they're going to say things and you're going to go, oh, that's just not good. And you want to just reinforce, well, that's one idea. Let's hear another one. So try to hold that negative criticism. One of the techniques I use when something really seems off the wall, I have a phrase I use all the time, and I would say, that's quite some idea you have there. I never realized how much I used it until I heard my son say it to my granddaughter when she came down just to go out for dinner with rhinestone earrings. She was 4 years old, rhinestone earrings, a tutu, and her Uggs. And he said to her, wow, Harper, that's quite some outfit you've got on. So find what your quite some statement is, because it really makes a difference, and you'll never have a kid feel bad when you tell them that's quite something. We talked about, the importance of trying to pair kids or team students to really come up with that social cohesion. And as Nicole said, the whole idea of teams is cohesiveness, because that's one of the challenges. And a team can stay together even if they're not in the same room. And that's why we really encourage you to build that idea of team into what you're doing. And that, especially for those younger kids, you may want to encourage their parents to become part of the activity. For example, in that little storytelling that Nicole just did, you can say, why don't you invite, your mom or whoever's in the house to come listen to the story with you, and let's see what they have to say. So it can become a little bit of a family storytelling. In some of the activities, we actually, especially for those younger kids, we provide them with questions that maybe they're going to ask the person at home just about the same thing that they studied, that they talked about. I think we especially do that in the bravery and the courage. So that kind of gives you a framework for what you've got here. As we've said, this is only a framework. It's a scaffolding. It's up to you to decide how you want to arrange it, how you want to put it together, when you want to put it together. We suggest you do it early in the year so it becomes routine to kids, because they often look forward to these activities because they're just a time out. They're a wonderful break, and there's a point to them. They're not useless activities just to spend time. There really is something that reinforces that social emotional learning. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Marnie to wrap us up.
Great. So, whether, as Maureen said, you use this curriculum as a 10-session lesson sequentially, or you incorporate bits and pieces throughout the year, we hope that it helps you to support your students. As we say goodbye for now, I want to request that you take a moment today to complete our evaluation for this training. When you do that, it really helps us keep continuing to do what we do and offer you more of this and more of things that you might want, other things you might want. We're going to see you again soon, so it's just bye for now. On August 14th, the trauma-informed approaches to school mental health during COVID-19 will be ready to be downloaded and viewed. Between now and then, if you need anything or have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks for joining us. Take care. Bye.
Bye.